Hello, and thank you for joining us today for Building Realistic Budgets. My name is Randy Dunauer, and I'm one of the Municipalities of Saskatchewan directors from the City of Saskatoon. Before I introduce this session's presenter, let me hand things over to Wade Robichaud from ATS Traffic to bring greetings.
After 50 years of serving large-scale customers and municipalities, we found it's not easy for them to keep track of every asset they have. That's why we developed the Reflector app to help our customers manage their signs and traffic equipment. Manufacturing details, location, installation date, and other key asset details are recorded and available on your smartphone. Reflector integrates into any asset management system, lowering operational costs and maintaining organization, which results in safer, more efficient roads.
Thank you for making us the trusted leader in traffic safety. We promise to continue to deliver on time and error-free. Traffic safety is our passion. Driving innovation is our goal. Helping you get to your destination is our mission. And our eyes have never left the road.
Hi everyone, my name is Wade Robichaud. I'm a product specialist here at ATS Traffic. Welcome to the 2021 SUMA Annual Convention. Although it's a little different this year than we've seen in the past, nonetheless, ATS Traffic is a proud sponsor of this event. For those of you who do not know who ATS Traffic is, we are 3M's largest privately owned certified fabricator in Western Canada, with locations near you in Regina and Saskatoon to serve you best. With our partnerships with SUMA, we've been able to offer members exclusive and strategic pricing on the best traffic control and safety equipment in the industry today. We encourage you to swing by our booth, engage in a conversation with us, and learn why ATS Traffic is your trusted leader in traffic safety. Once again, thank you for joining us at the 2021 SUMA Convention.
Thank you, Wade. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, its logical president, Kelly Riddick. Kelly has extensive experience pushing the boundaries of strategic planning and building alignment with organizational functions. As a public servant, he has embraced a passion for people, community, and the potential that's there when it all comes together. When Kelly was acting as the Director of Corporate Planning in 2017, Strathcona County received the Canadian Association of Municipal Administrators Award for the implementation of priority-based budgeting. Drawing inspiration from PBB and receiving an endorsement from its founder, Kelly uses it as a foundation to support municipalities and nonprofit organizations through an innovative strategic planning process. I hope you enjoy this session and the rest of convention.
Before we get started, I wanted to do a quick shout out to Strategic Steps and their president and my friend Ian McCormick, who let me know about this opportunity. So thanks for your time, your attention, and most especially your dedication to public service. I have a great appreciation for municipal government work on both sides, the elected officials and administration. So a little bit about me. I have 28 years experience in municipal government. The last prior to creating its logical strategic planning services was as the Director of Corporate Planning for Strathcona County. Strathcona County is the municipality on the east border of Edmonton and has about 100,000 population. But since 2019 February, I've been running its logical. I was motivated to try my hand at sharing knowledge broadly, and my experience implementing priority-based budgeting with Strathcona County was a big factor for the change. We had won a CAMA award for the implementation in 2017, and I do have a really strong belief it's an essential component to overall success for a municipality, especially given the current landscape from which we're operating. Here are the deliverables I hope to achieve today and that I'm looking to share with you. I intend on sharing what we get to every one of these areas, and that's nice because we have a video format, so you're here for the duration. but only so much can be shared over the video. So, and we're not going to have a chance to have some back and forth. So I do strongly encourage you to follow up with me after the video, after having watched the video. So we're going to go over what is priority-based budgeting and why you might choose to implement it. We're going to talk about how you can align the value of your programs in your organization to those prioritized goals, which should reside in your strategic plan. We're going to go over a little bit on how you might be able to leverage some corporate and community relationships to maximize the value of the things that you're currently doing. There will be some tips and tools for prioritizing your stakeholders, whether those be internal or external. And we'll get into how to use priority-based budgeting to best align your strategic plan, your business plans, and ultimately your budget. So simply put, priority-based budgeting can be summed up as knowing what you truly is the most important thing for your community, and those are your priorities. Truly understanding what you do to deliver on those priorities for your community, and that's in your programs. Applying some rigor in valuing what you do, so that's the program impacts on your priorities. And then ultimately allocating your resources and effort to maximize your value of your budget. And there's some really huge intangible benefits of this budgeting methodology, such as building a culture of corporate accountability, enhancing trust between administration, council, community, and encouraging innovative and creative thinking in service delivery. And perhaps these are really good follow-ups for when you reach out after the session. But this video itself is mostly about trying to maximize that value in your current budget. So I like this slide. It was borrowed from the city of Edmonton, who tried priority-based budgeting many years ago and stopped actually doing it, but they're actually re-engaging an effort around priority-based budgeting. So this is the evolution of budgeting, and I'll tell you from left to right what priority-based budgeting isn't. I would argue it's the most evolved of the budgeting methodologies, but way back when there was another budgeting methodology called zero-based budgeting, and it was kind of a buzzword when Jimmy Carter was president. I know it's still being used here and there, and well, perhaps a good tool for smaller operations and probably private. The enormous effort of stripping down the budget to nothing and rebuilding it every year really eats away at any of that desired value from going through the effort. So it's very, very labor intensive and probably been abandoned mostly even by the private marketplace. The next on the evolutionary scale, I would say, is incremental budgeting. And I would guess that's mostly where most municipalities and probably provincial and federal governments are today. And that's really just taking what you did last year and adding and subtracting for costs and revenues as they become more evident to you. It's more of a costing exercise. I argue you still need to find out what your costs are, but there's very little element of prioritization involved. And it may lead to, you'll hear these days, looking for 3%, maybe a 3% cost reduction across the board. Those kind of lack of strategy leads to these very arbitrary cuts across the board and are not strategic in any way. It's also not, I guess, what I would say is closest to priority-based budgeting. You may have heard of results-based budgeting. And results-based budgeting is something I believe still being used with the province of Alberta. I'm not sure what Saskatchewan does at the provincial level. But results-based budgeting is closer to priority-based budgeting in that lots of the allocations of your effort and resources go towards achieving some results. But I think what is lacking in that results-based budgeting effort is that overall overarching effort to achieve something at a strategic goal level. So something that would be looked at that would benefit either the whole community or the whole organization in as far as a goal statement. What tends to happen still at the provincial level is there's many ministries that line up at the end of the year in their own siloed kind of area. And it's a battle for resources, and there's not a lot of culmination of a corporate effort or a corporate strategy. So priority-based budgeting, I would argue for you or to you, is the most evolutionary of those budgeting methodologies. Again, these are those 4 areas that I suggest are, in its most simplistic form, priority-based budgeting. And I'll go over them in order because the order is important. Priorities start with trying to achieve that absolute clarity. And they're first for a reason. It makes sense to then use that logical application of those priorities in everything you do and get kind of that mindset around the priorities set before you go down the other steps of the process. What would be something that would be hugely valuable in the whole exercise is to get your whole organization and ultimately your council and your community understanding that priorities are driving decision making, not the numbers that fall out in the budget. So this is a definition of a priority that I really like myself. In essence, it shares that something takes precedent over something else. And that's most especially relevant in times of shortage or constraint. I think what is equally important when you identify priorities is you're identifying those things that are not priorities. And I will say, and I get into it later in the presentation, that it'll take some leadership stamina to stay true to those priorities, but without understanding what they are to start with, you're behind the ball to start with. So, and when I say priorities, I would say capital P priorities and not small p priorities, such as things like potholes or barking dogs, or in my community right now, council has decided they want to look at a cat bylaw. I would suggest that might not be a big P priority for me and for, I would say, many of the residents, especially given the times that we're facing. So big P priorities, I would suggest the organization and council for sure think in terms of legacy, think in terms of the community-wide impacts of those priorities, and put the lens of trying to create this clarity of purpose around your priorities. So try to get to attain the highest level of the priority. And in my opinion, we'll get into this a little bit later in further slides. Priorities are not just words either. So what might show up in a strategic plan or business plans are very generic terms like recreation or transit or police. The clearer priority for me is when that is stated in terms of a goal statement itself. And it just adds a lot more clarity around what that specifically means for your community. Recreation is used generically across many, many municipalities, but when you peel the onion, recreation is much different for one community as opposed to the community probably right beside them. So if you're an elected official, you're likely told that the most important thing you'll do is pass a budget. And budget probably drives a lot of what administration thinks is hugely important as well. And while I don't disagree that the budget is important, terms like things that get done are things that get budgeted. There is some truth to that. But for me, I disagree with the sentiment that it's the most important thing that's done. I would argue that's the strategic plan. And the most important thing is everything that goes into making a decision around budgeting. And it's really the most important elements of trying to achieve what it is that your community wants you to achieve. I think it's probably the lowest form of a conversation that you can have when you just simplify it down to numbers. I'm a little discouraged. I admit I'm not sure what shows up in the Saskatchewan municipal reason for being that's given to you by the province. In Alberta, it's our Municipal Government Act. And there's volumes in the Municipal Government Act that talk about how to dissolve actually being a municipality. But there's nothing on a strategic plan, which is really unfortunate. And again, volumes on budgeting, but nothing on strategic plan. So to give a little bit of slack to the elected officials, especially new ones, they're inundated with this budget talk, and the legislation really backs that up. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done by administration, and especially senior administration, to get elected officials to really embrace the importance of a strategic plan. And to me, it's the most important thing you can do as an elected official is to really embrace and really endorse and champion that strategic plan. This constant focus on the strategic plan, as I reference here, the one plan to rule them all, a little Lord of the Rings reference. The ultimate goal here for me, and I get this reputation of using the term value a lot. I really think priority-based budgeting allows you to try to maximize the value that you get out of the resources that you have and that have been afforded to you by citizens. If we were in a room together, this is where a point I'd ask the room if you have a strategic plan, and then I'd follow that up by asking if you use that plan to create your budget. The point of leaving this slide in here is to just maybe highlight the highest level of message that I'm trying to share is it's really hugely important to have that strategic plan. And it's really vital to make sure that that strategic plan and the goals that are embedded within it are actually the driving force of creating your budget, not some arbitrary look to cut to a certain percentage of tax increase or balance the budget. You'll still have to balance the budget, but if that's all we ask the budget to do is be balanced, we're missing an enormous opportunity. So this is your strategic plan, really some of the elements that I think are really important in a good strategic plan. And those are, of course, you're going to have a vision statement. This is borrowed from, I believe, one of my clients in Alberta, Beaver County. So they've talked about being an innovative leader in food, energy, and housing, specifically to their situation and specifically uniquely them. This felt really good to them. It's not generic. It is short, so they can use it. It rolls off their tongue when they go to meetings and such. You'll see the strategic goals as well, and I won't read them out. There's a slide for you there to look at, but they are goal statements, and they should also feel very unique to that municipality. Most especially, I think they were really wanting to diversify their assessment base because that was something that their citizens would benefit from, is having some more industry and commercial. The other thing that can be really, really important, and if you can get your elected officials to embrace this idea, ranking the goal statements is one of the most impactful things that you can do for your administration. Because when they go down the road of priority-based budgeting, there is a scoring that happens in the programs, and we'll get into that at the highest level. But ranking the goals goes back to that prioritization. And this is a nice number to have for, you'll see another example later where there's eight strategic goals. So I wouldn't get very many more than that. But the ranking is important because all of our programs will have different levels of impacts in these goals. And in a prioritized environment, if you don't rank them, well, it doesn't allow administration then to, when they're budgeting, reallocate and repurpose to try to achieve success in the higher ranked goals. Everything is important, but if this is a really powerful decision-making tool, and when push comes to shove, we're trying to achieve that maximum value. So with a ranking, we tend to try to support either broadly impacts over a lot of different goals, or try to achieve success mostly in the higher ranked goals, and maybe be in maintain mode in the lower ranked goals. Here's another set that is really close to home for me. This is our council in Strathcona County. And so kudos for them. Again, you'll see that these are very unique to this municipality. Especially, I would highlight goal number 3 there, where it talks and references about the petrochemical industry. So if you know anything about Strathcona County, very known regionally and probably across the country as, I think, the second largest petrochemical assessment cluster in the country. And so hugely important for our municipality, and you'll see that uniquely identified in our council's strategic plan goals there. They also did a consolidation effort. So we didn't, and I would suggest this is important for all to consider. Strategic plan is important for long-term goals, but don't create the strategic plan and then go away and not see your council or your community until the end of it. And I'm assuming everyone does this anyway, but it's important enough to share. We afforded our council the opportunity to have a retreat, a strategic planning session every year, to go into these goals and ensure that they still worked for council. They reflected what the community was thinking. Of course, things change from year to year environmentally as well. COVID, a really good example. Who knew that that was going to hit us? So I know that our council and another council in the region here in the city of St. Albert specifically looked at these goals with COVID in mind. And thankfully for our council, you'll see the goal number 1 there is around the social infrastructure. So there didn't need to be any jigging in there as far as re-ranking. So, but I would caution that yearly check-in is more of a tweaking than anything else, because it's difficult for administration to turn the boat around, so to speak. If you were to change goal number 8 to goal number 1, that's a harder thing to do than maybe massaging goal number 2 into number 1 or 4 to 3. Right. So to go further than those goal statements themselves, another level of clarity that can be provided for administration and largely done with your council, with reflections from your community in there, or you'll see the strategic results that go with that previous example of Strathcona County's goal number 1 around their social goal. These results really are one of the more impactful things that can happen again for your administration when they're asked to go look at what they do to try to achieve these goals. They will line up their programs or their services against these results, and simply the most valuable programs would be the ones that achieve more of these results. So it's really a fairly simple process of going through your programs and just seeing whether they have impacts in, let's say, diverse and inclusive communities, how their affordability ranks with each other. Those are important results we want to achieve in this goal area. So, and the one nice thing that is done in this area too, These results are thought about with the thought of reporting back to the community and gauging performance. So I know performance measurement is something that is on the minds of both the community and council, and internally we want to make sure that we're continually improving. So try to find some results that are easily measured, and so that you can see how you are doing trending with your performance. So again, this would be a point where I would ask the audience, if there was one that was with me, whether their strategic plan had well-articulated goals and those were complemented with some results. Again, this could be a good follow-up with someone like myself and or Ian, who was mentioned earlier, around that foundational work around a really good strategic plan. So we'll go into the next section of the 4 that I think are the areas that are to be looked at when implementing priority-based budgeting, and that is programs. I would say to you that programs are not departments. Use the terms earlier, recreation. I use the term transit. So when you look more intimately at that area, those are not something that I think you can make a decision on necessarily. There's lots of programs within that department that you'll be making decisions on, and maybe turning the dial up and down in. In the Edmonton region here, if someone was wanting to see a good example of a program inventory, I would say the city of Fort Saskatchewan is probably one of the better examples that I've seen, and that's another neighbor of the city here and of Strathcona County. And I'm sorry, PBB is relatively new north of the border. I should have said that. It's predominantly been done in the United States. And so when I'm mentioning these examples, it's the closest to home, I think, that I can find. Saskatchewan, I'm not aware of too many that have gone down the road of priority-based budgeting. So we might be breaking ground for you there. It's exciting times. And so I've also have a link here that I'm going to try to go to. So this is Resource X. This is a company that was created by the founder of priority-based budgeting. His name is Chris Fabian. I wanted to make sure that this was referenced because I've borrowed a lot of what Chris has done. An engineer by trade who worked with an accountant actually to create the methodology in response to the 2008 recession that we had, especially hit the United States hard. So I would suggest checking out resourcex.net and seeing what's on that page. There's a lot of different municipalities that have done some pretty creative things. So I'd be remiss if I didn't suggest having a look there, especially with the programs work that is required. So once again, I would suggest that priority-based budgeting programs are not departments. They're not even necessarily services per se. What we want to try to have you do is try to wear your citizen hat when you're thinking about programs as well. Programs are not a department, or let's say something like public works, which is a service that you might use internal speak to share with your internal client. But the program in public works, for example, might be winter snow clearing, or let's say they have some influence on the trails. And in recreation, the programs in there are things like playgrounds or swimming. So for priority-based budgeting, one of the terms that I really like to use, and it sometimes rubs admittedly people the wrong way is I use the word relevant. And for me, what relevancy means is ensuring that you're always checking that your programs are doing what you wanted them to, and not necessarily just taking last year's levels and recreating them the next year. And I would caution against rushing to things like being efficient and effective in the programs from last year without having gone in and ensuring, maybe through a public satisfaction survey or looking at your usage data of different programs, to ensure that they're still as relevant as they were when you created them to your citizens, because this is really largely about citizens. And if we don't have that more structured, rigorous look at our programs every year, I think we're missing a really big opportunity. And go back to that arbitrary cutting scenario. If we go in and we try to achieve a across the board cut, what we are doing, likely unintentionally, is we're impairing the most valuable thing that we do for our citizens, in the same way that we're impairing the least valuable thing that we do for our citizens. And to me, it's just not a logical thing to do. You should be looking to repurpose or reallocate from those areas that are less valuable for citizens, and really strongly try to support those that are really valuable to them, especially now. Ultimately, we're a service delivery agency, and it's incumbent upon us to make sure that those services continue to provide value to the community. If they don't, we really have to look at those, again, reallocation and repurpose opportunities to make sure that we're as relevant as we possibly can be. This term, you've probably heard it, I've heard it. It really leads to that conversation that a lot have with me when I talk about the virtues of priority-based budgeting. Is this is a change effort. If you decide to go down the road of priority-based budgeting, people will say, well, why would I change? I like what I'm doing. When you challenge them on their programs, well, that's just the way we've always done it. Well, I also hear that municipalities, especially the more progressive thinking municipalities, try to encourage innovation and some risk taking. It's a really good value that I see show up in municipalities. But if we fall back on our laurels there, and we give credence to these kind of statements like that's the way we've always done it here, we're really squashing that idea of innovation and risk taking and trying to build that culture of continuous improvement. And your staff ultimately are likely your biggest expenditure, thus your biggest investment into your organization. So that is a really important area to make sure you're getting a lot of value. So again, if we were in a room together, I'd ask you whether you have a program inventory. I might even ask some folks to share their thoughts around how well that program inventory speaks to the citizens. And just wear that hat continually in the whole effort, because this is really, again, about maximizing value to your citizens. I think their appetite for continuing to do the same thing last year and possibly asking for more taxes to do that is likely waning, and there's probably more legitimacy to that than there ever has been. So now that we've gone through the effort of establishing some really clear priorities, and we wore our citizen hat and dove into our organization and found out what the programs are that we perform to achieve on those priorities, we get into the valuation exercise. And I think this is where priority-based budgeting distinguishes itself from other budgeting methodologies. So I love this definition of value, because this is what we're trying to do for our organization, to make really good decisions. Value there, as it's defined, it's a relative worth, merit, or importance. This really like the importance piece because it ties it back to our talk about priorities. So these here are 4 of the most common criteria that are used when going down the road of implementing priority-based budgeting to determine the value of a program. There are more, and I'm going to bring up a bit of a dashboard for a very progressive thinking municipality in a couple of slides. But really, when you're looking at your programs, you're going to look at how much impact they have on furthering success in your prioritized strategic goals. You'll also want to look at things like the degree of mandate that program has. And by degree of mandate, I'm talking about whether you perform the program because the federal government has dictated that to you, whether it's a provincial statute. You may have a bylaw that's unique to your municipality that you've decided to enact. But you may also just be trying to satisfy a best practice or some policy internally for your municipality. And the importance of degree of mandate is there's probably more wiggle room with that lowering degree of mandate. If you just have a policy, there might be more of an ability to say, well, really, are we getting everything we want to out of this? And we have it's easier to maybe abandon something like that than if you're dictated federally to do something. Reliance on municipality to provide the program. This gets to that one of the deliverables I talked about earlier about how you might be able to look at your program and look outside of your organization as well. There may be someone in the community privately that also provides that program. And you might not have considered in previous years what some sort of partnership looks like, or whether you're even the right provider for that program. Maybe you want to get out of the way of private industry and look to repurpose or reallocate the effort that went into a program. It's not the easiest thing to do, but unless you look at it, it's kind of off your radar. And another one is the portion of the community served. And I would also say a portion of the organization that is served, because there's 2 different types of programs, internal facing programs. And those are things like your communications internally, or legend legal, or finance is largely internal facing. Whereas external facing programs like recreation, things we've talked about earlier, public works. So you look at the portion of the community or the organization served. Harder to make a decision on some of the programs that serve the vast majority or all of the community, as opposed to you may find that one of the programs that you're providing for the community has really waned in its demand. And you might still be providing it to the level that you always have, but maybe there's only 5% of the community that's benefiting. So again, it might open up an opportunity that you might not have otherwise thought about if you didn't look at this criteria. So here is the municipality that I really wanted to show you. This will whet your appetite for what can happen with priority-based budgeting. So this is Longmont, Colorado, and Longmont has engaged with ResourceX to turn on a dashboard for their priority-based budgeting work. And what you're seeing across the top here is these are the areas that they've identified in their strategic plan for their goals, and they've gone that extra step to make them their own. You'll see this in the livable centers area. They have a goal called create an integrated and quality parks, recreation, greenway, and open space system. The really compelling thing that happens here is they've got the ability here to go into So they call, in priority-based budgeting, we call the goals the results areas. So they've got all their results here. And we're looking at this result right now, the livable centers result. They have their budget here, and they have their areas of their organization, so the departments, in this tab here. So I'm going to go into the community services area. And what's going to happen down below is this is an illustration of all of the different programs in the community services area and their ranking of those programs towards that goal. So you'll see here, this is the recreation center, and they've given it a score of 2 out of a possible 4. They're showing here the budget that's attached to that area, so the 1.413 million, and the FTE component. Try to find one that's maybe scored a little bit differently. These are all 2. So here's something that's been ranked a 0, and it's likely a seasonal thing. Yeah, seasonal ice rink. So maybe they scored this differently for summer versus winter. So they have a 0 here. Try to find one that has maybe a higher rank. Looks like it's consistently 2 or lower. And you'll find that some areas just don't rank highly in some of the goals, and that's fine. This is a bit of that cultural thing that happens is I would take a longer term approach to priority-based budgeting. This is not going to happen overnight. And the scoring that happens, there's 2 phases. So you get the internal department who where those programs reside to rank their own area. And then what you do is called a peer review process. So you get a cross section of the organization to look at all of the programs that have shown up in the goal from all the different areas and validate whether the scoring was correct being done by those departments. And as often as the departments have a bias to overrank, they also have the tendency to underrank some of theirs. So the peer review support is quite important. This might be something if after the video you might want to pull this up yourself. So hopefully the browser there shows up well enough that you can do it. So this is the point again. If we were together, I'd be asking how many finance folks are in the room versus strategic or corporate planners. And it'd get to a conversation around how hugely important it is to invite those strategic and corporate planners into the budget creation process. They are as valuable as the financial planners or the accountants, especially if you're going down the road of priority-based budgeting. What priority-based budgeting does better, I think, than other methodologies is inviting the idea that the budget can and should be thought of as, and perhaps more importantly, a decision-making tool on how to support the priorities while at the same time maximizing value instead of just balancing a budget. So the reason for the last slide is that I feel priority-based budgeting doesn't necessarily do, the name itself doesn't do the process justice. In our world as it exists today, I believe when we talk about budget, we automatically think about the words balancing and costing. And these are important for budgeting for certain, but our budgets need to be balanced for sure. And we need to know what things cost. But again, priority-based budgeting is a decision-making tool, and nothing will take the place of a financial effort that goes into costing and balancing. But the decisions that are made that lead to those financial decisions are probably what should be driving the process more so than just balancing a budget. And so there's a costing component to priority-based budgeting that I really don't get into in great detail because it just doesn't translate well to a presentation like this. And so if you decide to implement priority-based budgeting, I think it's a really good follow-up for myself, or I would be turning you on to folks like the creators of the program itself, because the tendency is, from a financial perspective, is to go down the rabbit hole of trying to recreate a financial effort on both sides. I would suggest the decision-making side, which is priority-based budgeting, should be unique and doesn't require the level of sophistication that a financial and budgeting, balancing practice does. So a good follow-up after this. So finally, the step where it all comes together, and that's now you've gone through the effort of the prioritization and figured out your programs. We valued them, so we have a list of our programs, and in descending order of value, we now allocate our budget. And the goal here is clear when allocating your resources is to achieve maximum value. We need to leave behind historical biases and leave behind department biases. Emotion is taken out of the equation, hopefully, and we stress some really logical decisions. And reallocation should not only be encouraged, it should be applauded. And ultimately, the goal should be that, looking and mining for value and looking for opportunities to reallocate and repurpose. That largely happens maybe within a department, but there can sometimes be some real magic that happens across departments as well. I'll share my own experience of probably the most powerful time that I have seen this reallocation occur. In Strathcona County, we were having some budget challenges one year, and one of the areas of our organization that was feeling the pinch was procurement. We were getting thrown a bunch of different regulations at us, and we needed to respond. And it was tough to keep up with all of the different intricacies that were involved with procurement. And I'm assuming that many who are watching this have had the same situation happen. So one of our department directors one year was wearing her priority-based budgeting hat, and she had noticed after going through priority-based budgeting effort in her area, she was struggling with filling 2 full-time equivalencies year after year, and she had done the reallocation and repurposing of some of her existing work to those areas, but still had these 2 full-time equivalencies showing up in her budget. And so what she said to the organization was that recognizing that the bigger priority for the whole organization to get requests for proposals and contracts through faster was to support the corporate procurement function. So she gave to the organization 2 full-time equivalencies that we would have had to add through increased ask from the taxpayer. So that was foregone because of the idea that she had come up with to give up those 2 FTEs, and it was largely a result of going through the priority-based budgeting exercise. Another example that I like to share is, so in our emergency services area, we had a very high-achieving priority-based budgeting champion who looked at all of the programs that they were providing and recognized that one of them, which was first aid, they were providing first aid to the community for free. That was a great reach out to the community. But unbeknownst to the rest of us, they were getting letters from the private marketplace someone in the community privately was also providing first aid services, but they were charging for it. So this letter would come every year saying, why are you in competition with me? You're impacting my bottom line. And so you can guess what the letter had said. Well, this letter started becoming more of a factor in the year-to-year look at that area. So this eager beaver brought to his director this scenario and suggested that maybe it's time to look at not providing the program for free in their area, and went to the next step of saying where they could reallocate that effort to an area that was in need. And that happened, but it did take a little bit of leadership to do that, because, you know, they did hear from the very few who were accessing first aid for free. But it was very legitimate argument when someone in the community was providing it, and that was their business. And the reallocation that happened made it a very strong candidate. And so that decision was made. So this is my quote that I like to share about priority-based budgeting. It really turns the budget into a powerful evidence-based decision-making tool that strives to maximize value to citizens, as opposed to a way to balance revenues and expenditures while minimizing taxes. I just think it's a fuller, richer conversation to have with every stakeholder, whether that be internally, externally, your citizens, businesses. It seems to be a very legitimate effort to have, especially, again, like I said, with either this downturn in the economy, shifting responsibilities from other orders of government, or COVID. I'm hoping that most of you, if not all of you, have some sort of strategic planning framework. And I just thought that I would share this slide. It goes over where priority-based budgeting lies. It lies in every one of these areas. And I would say there is absolute intent with the arrows, in that the vision and our strategic plan and goals are driving conversations, and the budget should be a result of all the decisions that have been made in these higher level documents. So here I talk about the recipe for success, or what I like to say is there's different levels of success that you can have in priority-based budgeting. And I would say that these are some of the conditions that set you up for achieving some really great things. Leadership. So it takes some stamina to go through a strategic planning effort and to come up with some very clear articulated goals. I know councils are elected here in Alberta for 4 years. I confess I'm not sure if it's 3 or 4 for Saskatchewan, but so they have a fairly short window within the time frame of a strategic plan. But what I think you need to have in your arsenal is that real long-term kind of thinking, and stressing long-term success, and that takes a lot of leadership. Focus. So I talked about small P priorities. Those will always happen. So you're going to, as a municipality, have to deal with those, but whether they be potholes or barking dogs, or in my municipality right now, stray cats, have some focus on the long-term prize, while still allowing those more granular things to happen. But continue to look at the way that you do those smaller P priorities, because there may be a way to do them differently, or there actually may be a way to, like I said earlier, look at some other service delivery agent so that you can get on to the more important things that you've determined. And determination. This is something that is not going to happen overnight. You can have some real short-term wins that you need to celebrate, In Strathcona County, we were able to actually, in consecutive years, have a tax decrease. And that's not why you do the things that you do, but because we really focused on some reallocation and repurposing, that was the end result. But that was after having about 4 or 5 years under our belt of really challenging ourselves year after year and getting accustomed to that continuous improvement and mining for value. So you will get there. It's just not a short-term thing. This is if you've been doing incremental budgeting, there's a lot of change that has to occur, a mindset change. But stay focused and determined, and some really powerful things can happen. I guess this wouldn't be a presentation in 2020 without talking about COVID. And you see the big pause button there. I've been trying to talk to as many people as I can about COVID being, yes, a challenge, but at the same time, a really big opportunity. My municipal friends that I work with, I've seen them react very positively to COVID. They've had to adjust what they're doing and kind of create a new normal. But it seems to me lately that they've kind of gone into more of a stable mode now. And there has been a bit of a dialing back in certain areas. And so this stability now in the storm that's happening, I think, is a really big opportunity to look at tools like priority-based budgeting and set some vision of being better on the other side of this pause that we're having right now. What a great opportunity to really look long and hard at what you're doing and try to achieve that bigger value opportunity of demonstrating to your citizens that you're going to look year to year to making sure that you're nailing that well-being return for them on their taxes. Just another brief reminder that here's those 4 steps that I suggested you'll need to look at, and starting intentionally with priorities. These should be done sequentially, so I wouldn't necessarily start the work on your programs until you have a really solid strategic plan in place. There can be obviously some overlap, but I wouldn't get too far down the road on any of these without having a really solid start on the others. And here's my contact information. Do please reach out. I think it would be a really great conversation to have with folks if this resonated with them. And I think we have a really big opportunity in our sector to, again, leverage that pause we're being afforded to be better on the other side of it. And thanks again for your time.